Welcome to Tucker Carlson. Today, we don't spend a lot of time interviewing politicians. Why would you? They're horrible. But occasionally you see one who's not horrible, who's interesting, clearly thinking for himself, and that's the kind of person it's worth spending some time talking to. Joe Kent is that kind of person. He's a Republican. He's running for Congress in the state of Washington, 3rd District. He's a combat veteran, a father, and a Gold Star husband, tragically. Joe Kent joins us now. Joe Kent, great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Tell us your story before you tell us what you're doing now. Where are you from? What'd you do once you graduated high school?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from Portland, Oregon. As far back as I can remember, I wanted to join the military and go serve our country. It was either a combination of watching too much G.I. Joe and A-Team growing up, or, that was just what God put in my heart. As far back as I can remember, I was deeply impressed by men and women who went forward to go fight for our country while we enjoyed peace back home.
Yep.
So when I was about 13 years old, that's when the famous Black Hawk Down incident happened. So I saw that on TV, and I decided that I was very impressed that we actually had men and women out fighting in savage combat for our freedom so we can enjoy peace back home. So enlisted at age 18 in the Army, went right to Ranger Regiment, and then earned my way into Special Forces.
So right out of high school?
Right out of high school, yeah. 2 weeks after. I actually did the delayed entry program, so I joined my junior year. So I actually tried to join when I was 15, and the recruiters were like, no, you actually have to finish high school first.
What'd your parents say?
I talked about it for so long that they realized they couldn't talk me out of it. And I was very blessed. I got great parents, so they supported me going in the military. It's if you want to rebel in Portland, Oregon, you go enlist in the Army. So that's I guess that was part of my.
How many guys in your high school class did the same?
Just me and my best friend.
Wow. Did he stay in?
He did. Yeah, we both did 20 years.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So you enlist right out of high school.
Yeah.
You go to the Ranger Regiment. What happens then?
So I spent 3 years in the Ranger Regiment. It's peacetime, so Bill Clinton's president, so we're mostly just training. The little bit of combat that people before me had seen was either Mogadishu or Panama, so brief engagements. So I never imagined in my wildest dreams that I would be in a situation where I'd be in combat repeatedly. And then 9/11 happened. I was in Special Forces training when the towers fell, when 9/11 went down. So pretty much from that moment on, we got on a war footing, trained for war, and then pretty much deployed immediately upon completing the Special Forces course.
When did you deploy?
2003.
To where?
To Iraq.
Wow.
Yeah. So Iraq was pretty much, Special Forces are regionally oriented.
Yes.
So I spent most of my time in Iraq, about 5 years on the ground total there. So I was there for every year of the war except for 2010 when I was in Yemen.
You spent 5 years there?
Yeah, if you add it all up. So pretty much every year of the war, I was there for between 6 to 7 months. Yeah.
That's a lot of deployments.
Yeah.
Technically, how many deployments is that?
11 total.
That seems like a lot.
It was a lot, yeah. I was in for 20 years, so I was in for 20 years right at the start of the GWAT, and it's still going on now. So
what did you think of it?
So it was definitely the most formidable experience of my life. I really liked serving with goal-oriented people and then patriotic men and women who come together from all over this country to serve our nation. So I saw the best, and I also saw the worst of our country. Seeing the way that our politicians had no issues leaving us at wars that had no clear national security nexus, no clear and present national security threat, and then also no clear end state. That really disenfranchised me with politics and showed me, I think, the bad side of our federal government, and then how disconnected I think the American people and our elected leaders have become from the wars that we fight and our foreign policy in general.
Man, what a sad lesson to learn. You try to join at 15, you do join at 18.
Yeah.
It's all you want to do, obviously. You spend 20 years in. At what point, 11 deployments, at what point did you realize, wait a second, I'm being misused by our politicians here?
Pretty early on. I mean, it's definitely a gradual process. So 2003, I was a 23-year-old Green Beret sergeant. One of my missions that my team was tasked with was demobilizing a lot of the anti-Saddam militias and forming an Iraqi military. And then that was right after we pretty much fired every military-age male in the Iraqi military proper.
I remember.
Yeah, de-Baathification. Said, hey, if you're part of the Ba'ath Party, you can't have a job here. Me being 23 years old, I thought, okay, well, this seems like a bad idea because you just took all these well-trained soldiers and said, you don't have a job anymore and we're going to consider you criminals, but we didn't have a plan for securing the armories. And I was like, if this was if this was me back home and they fired me and left me the keys to the military base, I'd imagine what would happen. So I thought this is probably just a tactical blunder. But then as we started arming a lot of these different militias, some of them, the Kurdish ones by and large, were, they generally supported the U.S. policy over there and they were easy to trust. But a lot of the Iranian-backed ones, I had no idea why we were supporting these guys because you knew the history of.
So even at the level of the Green Beret sergeant, it was clear that bad decisions were being made.
Absolutely, but you think you have some hope that there's somebody behind the curtain at Oz, and you're like, well, surely there's a general somewhere that has a bigger plan, and I'm just not seeing it from down here. So I'm just going to head down and do my job, make sure that me and my friends come home alive, and do our job to the best of our ability. Because at the time, we still really believed that, okay, maybe Saddam did have weapons of mass destruction. There was a nascent al-Qaeda threat there, but we didn't realize that basically we had really accelerated that al-Qaeda threat, and that al-Qaeda threat was diabolically opposed to the Saddam regime. All those details became clear later, but at the time we didn't know. So it's probably about 2 or 3 years into my deployment cycle, especially seeing that what we were doing on the ground in Iraq, it wasn't working. It wasn't making us more secure. We were continuing to lose soldiers, but none of our leaders, those high-up generals, had the courage or the intestinal fortitude to stand up and say, hey, we got this wrong. Let's correct course. Like, the American people are being lied to about this, and we are spending precious blood and trillions of U.S. dollars on this endeavor it's not doing what it's supposed to do for the American people. I kept continuing to fail to see that. I stayed in the military because I believe deeply in my band of brothers and sisters, my tribe, because at the end of the day, I felt like as much as I politically disagree with what we're doing now, what am I going to do? Am I going to get out and am I going to let somebody else go on the next deployment? Or am I going to take the skills that I learned to try and go make a difference? And then especially to try and speak truth to power, to say, hey, maybe there's something different that we could be doing here.
Amazing. What a radicalizing experience. So what?
Very.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I reached a similar conclusion going to Iraq, but I was just there a short time and not under arms. I could leave whenever I wanted. You went 11 times. That's just blowing my mind. How many of the guys around you reached the same conclusion, do you think? Enlisted people you worked with?
I think the vast majority. There's a lot of guys that are, we're all patriotic. We want to serve our country. I think there's a lot of guys that just say, hey, if someone has to go do this for the nation, I will go do it. And then there's a lot more of us who said, hey, we don't need to be doing this. There's a different way that we can go about this. We can still secure our country. We can still have a strong foreign policy without these wars of occupation, these regime change wars. We don't need to do this. It's actually not in our national security interest. So I'd say the majority of us that spent our career on the ground, we've reached this conclusion. The problem is that the people that want to climb the ladder and become a senior ranking person, work at the Pentagon, you have to adopt the party line. If you don't adopt the party line, and the party line basically for Republicans and Democrats is we need to stay here forever. And not just do we need to stay here forever, we need to do more. It's not even a partisan thing. It's just that's the DC.
It's certainly not partisan.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's bipartisan.
Exactly.
What the officer corps? There are some very smart people.
There is.
Very smart. This must have occurred to them. Mm-hmm. Do you think they were aware of how counterproductive this was?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I think the problem is from the top down, starting with when Bush fired General Shinseki during the lead up to the Iraq War. That sent a pretty clear message like, hey, we will fire whoever goes against the party line, and we'll replace you with somebody who will say yes.
That's right.
And so if you want to stay in and you want to keep rising up the ranks, which with the traditional officer corps, they have to or they get put out of the military. So it creates a self-licking ice cream cone, essentially, of continuous war. And then you have a society that's completely separated from the costs of the war, a very eager professional military that will go and fight on their behalf. It's the recipe for perpetual conflict.
That's right. That Shinseki, I was such a I had a TV show at the time and over on CNN, and I remember the day that he fired Shinseki, and I was such a mindless partisan at that point. I didn't realize that I was, but I was. And I remember supporting that. And what Shinseki, whatever kind of person Shinseki is, I don't know anything about General Shinseki, but he was right.
He was right.
Yeah, he was right. As a factual matter about how many troops would be required to really pacify the country. Yeah. And he was fired for it. That was a moment. Were you aware of that when that happened?
Not at the time, but looking back. At the time I was very young and I just wanted to go.
Yes.
9/11 was fresh. And so all of us just wanted our shot at going over and participating in the war on terror, because at the time we all figured that this conflict would be sort of like Panama, Grenada, or Mogadishu.
Right.
And it was going to end and we were going to miss our chance. So we just wanted to go. I mean, that was the thing. But looking back on, because I wondered myself, how come some of these very, very smart senior officers who we pay to go get PhDs and stuff like that.
Yes, we do.
How come they aren't saying, hey, this just doesn't work? You know, we've tried multiple different strategies. There's been the whole counterinsurgency approach. There's been the strategic decapitation approach. None of it's worked. And what has it gotten for the country? So looking back and reflecting on why none of them actually had the courage to speak out, you know, that's when I started to think back. I was like, okay, well, the first guy that spoke out against what the party was putting out, he got fired. And that's a shot across the bow to any ambitious officer or really just guy who wants to keep his job.
That's exactly right. There are a lot of cowards, it turns out, serving in those positions.
Absolutely.
So, wow, that's a moving account that you just gave. So over the course of these 11 deployments, you wind up getting married.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, I first met my late wife in 2007 in Baghdad. She was briefing about a terrorist that we were going after. She was talking about where his location was. So met her real briefly there, but didn't get her phone number or anything because the pace of the war, I kept moving, and I didn't see her again for another 6 years. And we ended up in the same unit together, a unit that combines special operations folks and intelligence people together.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And she was killed.
She was. So she was killed in Syria in 2019 fighting against ISIS.
I'm sorry. Were you there?
I was not there, no.
Had you left the military by then?
I was retired from the military, and I'd gone into working in the CIA then.
What was that like?
It's actually a pretty natural transition. So
I know it
went
is.
from being in special
a well-trod path.
Well-trod path. Yeah, it's a pretty typical retirement, which sounds weird for most people, but 20 years in special operations, I went right into being in the paramilitaries. And
on the
CIA.
operations side there,
yeah.
To the extent you can describe it, what were the differences that you noticed between the way, DOD runs the United States military and the way the CIA is run?
There's a lot of cultural differences because they're recruiting from a different pool of Americans typically.
Yes.
CIA tends to lean a little bit more left at its core because they're recruiting so heavily from the universities.
Yes.
There's some, that's not 100% true for the paramilitary side because they recruit us all out of special operations. So I'd say we tend to lean a little bit more right. But in general, the CIA is a little bit more, I'd say, partisan DC establishment. But the upper end of the Pentagon is too, and then so is the State Department. So there is a very uniparty sense there in the leadership.
Yes.
And then again, the CIA's job is to provide intelligence, the ground truth to people. So I really like that mission. I like the concept of going out and finding intelligence, getting to the bottom of it, so we could prevent things like Iraq from happening. Because at the end of the day, our leaders, whoever's in the White House, they need actual ground truth. They need that intelligence. And so we have to have men and women that are willing to go out there and risk their lives to collect it and then to analyze it. So it's a great mission. It's a very noble mission. The problem is the political appointees, and then again, that incentive system for telling policymakers what they want to hear as opposed to what they should hear.
And Iraq is a perfect example. I mean, that was an intel failure, among other things.
Absolutely. Intel and political.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you enjoyed it?
I did, yeah. I really like the way that the CIA's core mission is to go out and try and find the truth, try and find actionable intelligence to help keep this country safe. Some of the partisanship that I saw there, I was pretty disgusted with. The same thing at the upper levels of the military, too. It was a night and day difference when President Trump came in. I mean, there was those of us that were on the ground that had been fighting the wars. We really liked President Trump's foreign policy because ISIS had taken over 2 countries at that time, 3 if you count Libya. And he said, hey, I want the caliphate crushed. Go in there, crush the caliphate, and we're getting out. And that was, so he gave us the tools that we needed, the authorities we needed to go in and conduct that mission. But then he attempted to at least get us out. Under Obama, there had just been this stagnation of we're going to continue to deploy, put people in danger, but we don't actually have the will to go in and defeat the enemy. So Trump was very refreshing, but then also the way that Trump cut through a lot of the rhetoric about why we got into these wars in the first place. He didn't pull any punches.
So among war fighters or people gathering intelligence on the ground, this was considered a good thing.
It was.
But by management, it was not?
Right. A lot of the senior leadership did not like the way that Trump had been critical of top DOD brass, the head of the intelligence community, saying, hey, you guys have gotten it wrong before, like as opposed to saying, hey, I believe everything that you guys say, which is what I think they wanted to hear.
Of course.
Trump actually had the audacity to say,
you guys are great.
Yeah, you guys are
good job.
Trump had the audacity to say, like, I'm going to check your math every now and again. It's like, oh, you're going to check my math? Like, how dare you?
So could you could feel the hostility toward him?
I could. Yeah, absolutely. I could. The longer I was in, I think I was probably at too junior of a level to see any of that under Bush.
Yes.
When Obama came in, we were told, hey, this is the commander-in-chief now. And all of us accepted that, of course. That's the oath that we took.
Yes.
He's the commander-in-chief. I didn't vote for the guy. But, hey, I would go and fight and die under him. Friends of mine fought and died under him. Not a big deal. When Trump came in, it was a night and day difference. There was a partisan bitterness to a lot of the leadership. They did not like what Trump had said about them getting things wrong before, and then they did not like the drastic changes that Trump wanted to make, because the government hates change, especially if that change is going to end programs, especially lucrative programs like wars. So there was a lot of just heavy disdain for Trump and his policies.
Articulated.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. With attempting to get us out of the conflicts is where I saw it. I mean, my wife would be alive today had President Trump's orders been followed. So Trump ordered our troops out of Syria when we defeated the territorial caliphate in December of 2018. She had orders, her and the folks that she was with, had orders to withdraw back to Iraq by Christmas Eve. Instead, because of Secretary of Defense Mattis resigning, the head of the counter-ISIS mission for the State Department, Britt McGurk, resigning as well, and then all the bureaucrats underneath them doing the old bureaucratic slow roll, our troops remained in Syria until January. She was killed in January in Manbij. She was killed fighting the enemy, but again, did they need to be there? We had accomplished our mission going after the territorial caliphate of ISIS. And to this day, troops remain in Syria for no strategic benefit to the U.S., waiting for us to get into a four-sided fight with Syria, Russia, Iran, and then the ISIS caliphate that still is an underground covert network. So that's seeing all that really put me forward into the path that I'm on right now. Because despite all the grief that I was going through after my wife was killed, I knew that President Trump had gotten it right, and the bureaucracy, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, had left her there and vulnerable. So I felt that it was my duty to start speaking out against what the establishment had done and in favor of what President Trump was attempting to do with our foreign policy.
That is very heavy. I didn't quite get the significance of that.
Yeah, that's what put me on the trajectory I'm on right now. So after she was killed, I got the opportunity to meet with President Trump. He came out to Dover when we received my wife's remains, and I got the opportunity to meet him real quick. I mean, he was very compassionate. So all those stories about him are completely false. He was very compassionate, and I told him, hey, this is me. I'm spent 20 years in the military. I've been over fighting in these wars for the last 15. I'm in the CIA now, and you're getting it right. Everybody that's in your leadership circle right now, they're not telling you that, but you're actually getting it right. We do need to be out of these conflicts. We're not getting anything from them.
Do you think, given what has happened under this new Secretary of Defense and under this new administration, do you think you could serve in the U.S. military today?
I think it'd be very difficult. I think now from my public statements being pro-Trump and then pointing out the failings of the establishment, I do believe that they would label me as some sort of an insurrectionist or a white nationalist or something like that. This partisan test that they're putting in with the security clearance process, I think, is very disturbing. That gives them leverage over anybody who's going to actually work in sensitive positions, because you really can't do much in the military or the intelligence community without a security clearance.
Of course.
So them using that as a gate and putting an ideological test in there the way that they are, and then also the way that they're putting in these political commissars is absolutely insane. I mean, Bishop Garrison at the Department of Defense, they tried to put in political commissar Estrada down at U.S. SOCOM, the Special Operations Command. And these are guys that have had public statements labeling every Trump supporter, a Nazi. And they didn't care enough to even delete their social media. So they're letting the troops know, they're letting the warfighters know, hey, if you step out of line, we will come for you. And I think that's why you're seeing so many senior ranking officers now that are on social media doing these huge, bending the knee to the cult of the woke, saying, hey, on the official U.S. Navy account, like, we have an all-gay helicopter crew, isn't that great? Or, a very critical issue right now is making sure that women can have ponytails. Like, none of this matters. None of us care if gay people serve. None of us care if women have ponytails. But all the senior ranking officers coming out and saying, like, this is now my new priority. It's just them saying, hey, don't fire me. I totally agree with the new regime.
Well, I mean, that's the definition of cowardice.
It is.
Cowardice. I mean,
It is. Yeah, and we're trying to turn the military essentially into a Praetorian Guard for the left. I mean, it's pretty disturbing to see.
So when you see Dick Cheney's daughter, I'm picking on her again, don't mean to, there are a lot of Republicans like her, but when you see them stand up and beat their chests on behalf of our troops,
right?
You know, with these kind of pro forma, this ritual of, you know, we love the troops.
Yeah.
How does that strike you?
It's pretty disgusting. It actually really makes me mad because it's usually like, we respect the troops so much, we want them to stay in combat forever. Even if we have to lie about it, like we saw off the Russian bounty story last year that Liz Cheney ran with, you know, members of the left ran with, the mainstream media ran with, like that we couldn't leave Afghanistan because the Russians were paying bounties to kill our troops. Because somehow Trump, by withdrawing our troops, then would be disrespecting them. So the most respectful thing we could do is leave them there to die. Absolute insanity. And then with a straight face, they have no issue saying, oh, we just made all that up. Like that was all a lie. And we should just completely and totally gloss all over that. So to me, the leaders that have shown the utmost respect for the troops are the ones that want to make sure that we're not bleeding out on foreign battlefields unnecessarily. There'll be times when we do have to deploy and we do have to go fight. We all understand that. That's why we joined. That's why we train so hard. But when the leaders are absolutely careless and reckless with that, that shows us the absolute utmost disrespect. Save all the platitudes. I don't care about that. None of us care about that. We want to be used to advance the national security of our nation and to secure our nation, not for someone's ideological experiment, which is basically what these nation-building wars have been, or to line the pockets of the military-industrial complex.
Man, you're even more impressive than I realized.
Thank you.
The reason that I wanted to talk to you, I just want to put it on the screen. This is I think this is your announcement.
It is.
Ad.
Yeah.
I see a lot of political ads and a lot of politicians. Can't overstate my contempt for all of them. This one really jumped out. This is yours.
In 20 years of fighting on the battlefields and through my wife's death, I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of failed policy. The events of 2020, including the lockdowns, riots, and a presidential election manipulated by a cabal of technocrats and bureaucrats, followed by a sham impeachment that our Congresswoman voted for, made it clear to me that I had to go forward and fight once more. I've never been someone who can ask others to go and fight for me. That's why I'm asking to go fight for you in Congress, just like I did throughout my 11 combat deployments. I view this fight in Congress as a continuation of the oath that I took 23 years ago. I'm here to support and defend the Constitution and to fight for my fellow Americans.
Something about that, you seem to mean it.
I do.
I can tell. Where do your politics come from? Were you political before?
So I think I've always been a conservative, always been a Republican. My folks are, I'd say, center-right.
Yeah.
But then seeing what I saw overseas, I mean, it gave me a great deep contempt for the establishment on both sides. I was pretty much done with the Bush era and the neocons, you know, about halfway through the Bush presidency.
Yep, me too.
Just seeing the way that they handled, especially the Iraq War and the lies, and then, you know, them having no issues with what was happening back home with all of our economic downturn. I was willing to I didn't vote for Obama, but I was willing to give him a chance. You know, he came in, he said he was going to end the wars as well, but then just seeing that was just a continuation of what the establishment benefited from. I mean, it made me very resentful of establishment politicians. And then Trump gave me a lot of hope. I mean, he won me over. I didn't know who Trump really was until, you know, he announced he was running for president. And then when he came in and he started going after the Bush doctrine, and he went after what was supposed to be sacred holy ground in the Republican Party of regime change wars and the fact that we need to be deployed all over the world, you know, building nations, that really won me over. I was like, that guy actually gets it. He knows what's going on. I mean,
it's just amazing the carelessness with which they treat lives like yours.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to the elites and the ruling class, I think the vast majority of working and middle class Americans, we are just, you know, pawns in their game. They have no issue sending us off to go die in a foreign country for their ideological experiment. And then also back home, they have no issues killing off entire industries and shipping them overseas and telling us, well, that's just how the free market works. Or, hey, man, environmentalism, right? I mean, isn't it great that we're not polluting anymore, but we just killed off entire industries and now you're all addicted to opioids? So seeing the ground truth that I saw, the failings of the establishment overseas, it really makes it, I think, a little bit easier and right up in your face to see what's going on back home, especially with our economy and especially with the way the left is attacking the glue of our culture that really holds us together and defines us: the family, the religion, and then patriotism. So the way that they're using that information attack against American culture and then the economic downturn, all that to me is just an assault on traditional American values and an assault really on hardworking men and women of this country. So seeing all that, the totality of it, I just compelled to go fight again. That's why I'm doing this.
You're running against a Republican.
I am.
Are you allowed to do that?
I am, yeah. Thank God it's America. Yeah.
Who are you running against?
Jamie Herrera Butler. So she voted for the impeachment of President Trump. That was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me. Put it so much up in my face that I was like, well, I can sit here and complain about this and watch my country kind of go down the tubes, or I can actually do something about it. So even prior to that impeachment vote, she was a horrible Republican. She voted to withdraw the funds for the construction of the border wall. She voted in support of Obamacare that's killed off so many businesses in our community. And then she voted for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. She voted to keep our troops in Syria with Liz Cheney. She was absolutely silent on the whole Afghan bounties issue. She votes for every single National Defense Authorization Act without batting an eye. And just issue after issue where we actually need someone with the spine to stand up. She doesn't, report to duty that day, or she sides with the other side. So it's time to get rid of politicians like her.
When's the primary?
It's in August of 22.
The leadership of the party in the state of Washington and in the city of Washington, of the Republican Party, how have they responded to your challenge?
I'd say, pretty neutral. There's a lot of folks, I think, that don't know how to handle the America First movement going and challenging sitting Republicans, because that's against, the rules that we're supposed to abide by. We're just supposed to vote for whoever the party says, even if it doesn't forward our values or advance our community at all. So I think there's some people that realize the gravity of the situation that we're in right now, especially with how hard the left and the Biden administration is pushing everyone. So we're gaining more and more momentum and support every day. Luckily, the Washington State GOP, they've amended their rules. They're going to give some support, I think, eventually to the challenger for the seat that I'm going after, Jamie Herrera Butler, and then Dan Newhouse, one of our other Republicans. He also voted for impeachment as well in a different district. So I think both of them are going to face serious challengers. I know Jamie Herrera Butler is going to, because I'm coming after her.
How have people responded to this? Like donors, for example, in your district?
Very enthusiastically. So we've been very lucky. There's a lot of people after 2020 that are just absolutely furious with the system, the establishment, the Republican Party for not fighting harder, especially fighting hard for President Trump for his first 4 years, and then the whole way the election went. So going out and rallying and getting people together and saying, hey, don't listen to the mainstream media. Don't be beaten down and say you're never going to vote again. Let's get together. Let's get organized, and let's make sure that we can actually take our community back. There's a lot of enthusiasm right now for that.
Do you meet a lot of people? How old are you? 40-ish?
I'm 41.
41. Do you meet a lot of people your age with your political views? It's a very specific kind of politics that you have. It gets almost no representation in the national media, I notice. Yeah. Do you know a lot of people who agree with you?
I do. I think that most of them just are not very politically active. They're not on the main social medias, and they're not out there stating their opinions. But I think the vast majority of the country does feel like this. They feel underrepresented. They know that left or right, Republican or Democrat, they're part of the same establishment that's been screwing over hardworking people for decades now on the foreign policy front, but then also back home with the way our economy is going. So a lot of people are just absolutely furious with establishment Republicans and Democrats.
You're from the Pacific Northwest. A lot of defense contractors there.
Yes, there is.
Do you think that fact plays a role in the way that representatives from the Pacific Northwest vote in the Congress? Most certainly.
I mean, there's big defense dollars there. So, again, keeping the wars going and just signing off on those National Defense Authorization Acts every year, there's a big incentive for that. So why stick your neck out and say, like, I'm not going to vote for that and lose that Lockheed, that Boeing, all those big dollars, especially with the way that I'd say in the last, especially since Trump came in, that those big corporations have shifted over to supplying the Democrats of so much PAC money.
What did you expect to do before your wife was killed? Did you expect to stay in CIA?
Before she was killed, yeah, I was going to make that my second career. I was going to do some time as a paramilitary officer and then switch over to regular operations. And my wife was planning on coming over as well. And we were going to just try and live at different embassies with our kids and kind of raise them overseas in that environment.
How old are your kids?
About to be 4 and 6, both summer birthdays. So very young. They were 1 and 3 when their mom was killed.
Wow, what's that? I mean, what is that like? I mean, obviously horrible, but I mean,
it was tough, but they've really grounded me. I mean, really, they're the reason why I'm in this fight, because in not too long, I'm gonna have to look them in the eyes and explain to them that this is the country that their mother gave her a life for, and the state that we're in right now. I just can't do that. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing and staying active and trying to actually make a difference. But it's tough. I mean, kids are the greatest blessing I've ever had. They give me purpose. You know, they've kept me together when I felt like I should be falling apart, you know, so it's they've been an absolute blessing. And
well, you kind of have no choice but to keep it
that's
together.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah, no choice but to keep it together and then try and do something positive and actually take the lessons that I learned, not just in the military, but from Shannon's death and make something positive out of it, something that's going to make a better country for them.
Wow. So what's campaigning like relative to the life that you've lived for the past almost 25 years, I guess now?
There's some similarities and there's some differences. I mean, in Special Forces, our job was to go out and you know, work with local people and then build together different networks and, you know, get the support of people from a wide breadth of the society. And so that's kind of what I'm doing right now, campaigning. I have to go out and talk to business leaders, you know, people from our logging industry, fishermen, all walks of life. So that part's kind of similar. Being out there this much is kind of weird. You know, asking people to please give me money is super weird and awkward. I think it's going to take a while before I get super polished at that.
I hope you never do.
Yeah, I hope not either.
if you start enjoying hitting up people for money,
Yeah.
you become a bad person.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Some of them do like it, by the way. I know some.
Yeah, they must. I don't know. It's a game, I guess.
There's some dark folks in politics. I have to ask you about Portland. You grew up in the city of Portland, Oregon. Hard to believe now, but really one of the prettiest places in the world and one of the coolest cities. I always loved Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
Now it's a hellscape. What happened?
Wow. I mean, it's hard to put your finger on any one thing. Obviously, the escalation of violence really happened after George Floyd incident and all that. But rewinding, there's been, I think, a deep-seated indoctrination that's gone on in our culture, and I think more left-leaning West Coast cities, for some reason, got it even harder. So I think it starts with the education system, then in particular the university system. So Portland, it's been a hub for technology. It's been a hub for a lot of the arts. So I think a lot of folks that went through the same university systems, they kind of got, you know, indoctrinated into this far leftist critical race theory ideology, where they do actually at their core believe that America is this horrible, evil, systemically racist place. And then life's been so good for so long, and people need to find some sort of a purpose that once someone comes in and they can make a compelling case that, hey, we need to go burn the system down now. All it took was that one incident for that to happen. And then an organized force like Antifa and BLM to come in and say, hey, rally around this banner. This cause right here is righteous. So there's legitimately people there that think that this is like their civil rights movement that they're participating in or some other form of revolution. And the scary thing is, it's not just the folks, the Antifa people that you see on TV that are clearly professional criminals. They're getting their support from normal Americans, middle class, upper middle class. The neighborhood I grew up in, they gave almost over $500,000 to the Kamala Harris bail fund to bail out the people that were burning their cities. So to me, it's the backbone of any insurgency is this ideology, because it's not hard to have a covert terrorist organization. You just need to be like relatively sneaky and good and devious, but to actually have popular support like an insurgency does, that's something completely different. That's that indoctrination.
It is different. I guess what I'm so struck by, though, is they haven't built anything. They've only broken things.
That's right.
So you go to Portland, and it's just physically, it's such a cool place.
It is, yeah.
But nothing that's great about Portland was built by any of these people. They've only broken stuff, defaced things, burned things.
That's right.
It's a purely destructive force.
Yes, it's 100%. And their vision for the future, they say, is some sort of racial equality utopia that they can never quite define, but they know what they want right now. And that's complete and total destruction and then complete and total control.
But they're not building the racially integrated utopia, which, by the way, I'm for that. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, but so, like, where's the utopia?
No.
It's only wrecking stuff.
No, the utopia only exists in their rhetoric, but what they want is they want that full control. They want to destroy, and they use violence. And I think so many Americans, thank God, they've never seen violence before, but that makes violence all that much more potent. You know, because I've seen this stuff overseas where violent actors can get control of people really, really quickly because it's just the law of the jungle. The biggest and toughest person that comes along and acts the most violently, they can actually get a lot of people to follow them because they're either impressed or they're scared. And I think that's what's going on right now in Portland and Seattle, because it hasn't, like, violence doesn't go on until it's actually checked by force. You know, violence never goes until, like, hey, on the 15th, we'll stop being violent. Like, it doesn't work that way. Portland and Seattle, we've just seen constant violent nights after violent nights and anarchy after anarchy because the police won't come out and actually arrest these people. And then when they are arrested, they're released right away because the district attorneys won't press charges.
Yes. Violence doesn't end until it's stopped.
It has to be stopped. Yeah, I mean, that's unfortunate, but that's just the law of nature, really. You know, so it's continuing to spiral. It's bleeding over into the district I live in. Now it's bleeding over into pretty much every major
You're across
city on
the Columbia River.
We're right across the Columbia River. Vancouver, Washington. It's basically a suburb of Portland.
Yeah.
So we've had some bleed over there as well, too.
Columbia River, the Snake River drains into that.
Yep.
It's an amazing.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I feel sad for people on the East Coast who haven't seen Oregon and Washington State, and they're defined by Seattle and Portland. But once you get outside, I mean, it's
beautiful. It's Cascades.
It's idyllic. Yeah, it really is. And there are a ton of normal people there.
There is. Yeah, if you get 20 minutes outside in the major cities, it's pretty normal.
Yeah. Do you see hope for the future in Portland or Seattle?
Unfortunately, I don't, because what's happened quietly, all the industries that actually employ people there, they're quietly leaving. Most of them want to leave their BLM and their racial equality signs up so that they don't get further vandalized or targeted. But all the money that actually drives those economies, like you said, the people that built those cities, they're quietly leaving. Anybody you can get out of their rent, their lease, whatever, they're getting out of those cities right now. The dollars are going to stop flowing into them because it's you know, business isn't going to hang out just for the sake of social justice.
Can I ask you a question? So if this were Baghdad and you were in charge of pacifying part of Baghdad or making it better, you wouldn't retreat. Your first option wouldn't be to, like, run away, right?
Right.
You would take a stand and say, you can't do this shit here. I'm sorry, this is not allowed. Like, you can't do this.
Yeah, we have law and order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't people who are, say, from Portland, Oregon, or Seattle, Washington, why don't they say, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to shoot heroin on my sidewalk. Like, get out of here now.
Yeah.
Where are those people?
The narrative, I think, that comes from the media and then the education system. I mean, the sense-making organs of our society are education and media, and both of them have almost been completely and totally infiltrated by the far left. So I think even people, when their first instinct is to say just that, stop burning and looting. You can't shoot heroin right here in front of the elementary school.
Go do it in
Not
someone
allowed
else's
to.
neighborhood.
But they've been told that when they have that instinct, oh man, that's racism. I don't want to do that. I don't want someone else, my neighbor, my friend, my coworker, to think like I'm a bad person, so I'm just not going to say anything. And then that just goes on.
So it is so powerful, the propaganda, that it's overwhelmed people's instinct for self-preservation.
Absolutely. Yes. 100%.
It's like, I'll let my kids be destroyed rather than say something unfashionable.
Yep. Or just quietly leave. So there's definitely some quiet exiting going on, but there's also just a lot more people that they're just scared and they don't know what to do. But they've been taught and conditioned that, hey, maybe this is actually a good thing, and this is kind of the way it's supposed to be. Maybe I don't like the guy shooting heroin, but like the burning the city every night, that's actually for racial justice. So we can kind of tolerate that because we don't want anyone to think that we're racist. You know, especially when Antifa and BLM are smart enough to label their groups, you know, anti-fascists and Black Lives Matter. Because then the next question is, well, you don't care about Black lives? You're like, no, I just don't want.
Are you pro-fascist?
Are you pro-fascist? Like, I mean, it's easy. Yeah, I mean, we laugh. We know it's absurd, but there's a lot of people that just don't want to speak out against it.
I'm starting to think the whole low testosterone level thing is real, though.
Something like it's got to be. Yeah, the indoctrination, and then I think there is just a lot of people that never have dealt with conflict before.
Yes.
And so whoever comes in and they act the most violent, they do have control and they do have power over it. And we've told young men for so long, hey, you don't want to go get into a fight. You can't do that. There's no reason to fight. There's no reason to ever be hostile with anybody. And we took out combat sports out of a lot of these schools. So I think there really is no actual like normal vehicle to go and check these bad actors. So it's like the only people that actually know how to use violence right now in our society are the bad guys.
That is such a deep point. And I think any effort to organize normal people, regardless of what they look like or even who they voted for, but just to defend like the basic things like keeping your park free of rapists and drug addicts, which would, I think, be worth doing.
Yeah.
If you tried to organize people to do that, you would immediately be shut down by the FBI, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. That's the FBI's like number one priority right now is like, grandmas in MAGA hats that were near the Capitol. I mean, we can't even get them to look at Antifa as they burn down cities, So, I mean, we just have our priorities completely backwards. Like, we need actual elected leaders to go in and say to the FBI, hey, what am I paying your paycheck for right now? How come you guys are putting up pictures from January 6th every couple of days, kicking down doors of people in Alaska, but you're not doing anything about the anarchy that's destroying cities in our country? I
They're going to come after you very hard.
They're going to.
Yes, because you are, everything you've said strikes me as moderate and decent and patriotic. In no way hostile or crazy or extreme in any way. That's my personal view of what you said. But you are challenging the basic storyline.
Yeah.
How do you think they're going to go? So I think you're the kind of person they're going to want to stop immediately.
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, I think the label of white nationalist, extremist, QAnon, I've already been called all that.
Have you already?
Yeah, just trolls on the internet. But I think that will be the narrative, in particular when I go up against the woman that I'm challenging. I believe that'll be a very powerful narrative that she'll use against me, that I've bought into Trump's QAnon or something like that. But I just really want leaders to stand up against everything that the far left is doing and the decay of our society. And if that makes me an extremist, then so be it.
Have you ever heard of The Atlantic magazine?
I have.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're going to profile you if you win this primary.
Yeah.
And my advice is don't return the call.
Okay. I already. Actually, I wrote the rebuttal when they did the whole suckers and losers thing against President Trump, because I had experience with President Trump when he came to Dover to help me receive my wife's remains. I had firsthand experience with Trump and the fallen, so I was able to tell that story as a rebuttal to what the lies that the Atlantic published. So
you're already on their list.
I'm probably already on their list. There's probably already a working profile of how I was radicalized in the military, and I'm the exact kind of guy that they need to look for in this extremist stand down. I'm sure that's coming.
I don't know why I'm laughing. It's so awful. The Daily Beast has your number.
Apologies to all my friends that are still in the military.
Amazing. Well, you've given me hope. Joe Kent, 3rd District of Washington State. We never get involved. I mean, this is not a political show, really, and involved in like a primary or whatever, but I am fervently hoping that you win this primary and you're elected to Congress. And
Thank you very much.
Many people follow your example. I mean that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for spending the time with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Liz. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, and remember Pete Buttigieg is the transportation secretary who said that parenting twin boys is the most demanding thing he's ever done. Unfortunately, he said that in the middle of a supply chain crisis that left a fleet of container ships stacked up in ports from New York to Los Angeles with no workers to unload the cargo and no truck drivers to carry the cargo. Then again, Secretary Buttigieg might have been right about the demands of fatherhood, because at the very height of the supply chain crisis, the secretary wasn't leading the charge. He was on a 2-month paternity leave. Then came a series of airline fiascos beginning last Memorial Day weekend, where 3,000 flights were canceled. The airlines blamed a combination of bad weather, bad planning, and a lack of pilots and air traffic controllers. The airline said it had nothing to do with mandatory COVID vaccines, which turned out to be untrue. Then in mid-June, another 1,500 flights were canceled. A frustrated Buttigieg then met with airline leaders to get to the bottom of the cancellations. The next day, the secretary's own flight was canceled, though he was reimbursed. And by late summer, Buttigieg was apparently in no mood to deal with the demands of railway workers, so he jetted off to Portugal. His flight was on time. And while Buttigieg has been an outspoken critic of the airline problems, today's FAA problem belongs entirely, totally to the federal government. Buttigieg said several times today he is looking into the root causes. But if the border crisis is any guide, root causes is federal code for no clue what to do. Tucker.
I'm guessing transphobia, but, I don't have the inside scoop on this. We'll find out. Trace Keller, thank you so much.
Sure.
This is a Fox News alert. A new trove or sheaf or bundle of classified documents has just been found by people who work for Joe Biden, his lawyers, his aides. We don't know. Where were they found? We don't know that either. All we know right now is the documents were not in the same location as the first batch of illegally retained documents. That would be the Penn Biden Center, the magnet for Chinese money that the discredited University of Pennsylvania runs. The Biden administration, again, will not say who found these documents, why, or where. But don't worry. Today, the White House press secretary insisted it's not a big deal. Relax.
How can President Biden be trusted moving forward with America's secrets?
Because his lawyers, his team did the right thing.
But he had a closet with classified
his
information
lawyers
in it
did the
that
right
they found. How did it get there?
Again,
Did the lawyers do
he
the
was
right
surprised
thing?
that the records were there. He spoke to this
But they were
personally.
there.
He was surprised that the records were there, and when his lawyers found out and his team found out that they were there, they turned it over to their archives, and now it's being reviewed by the Department of Justice.
Did you hear that? He did the right thing because he's a good person, unlike the Orange Man. So we don't need to send the FBI to go raid his home and root through his wife's underwear drawer. Everything's cool. He's a good person. He did the right thing. By the way, that's kind of a consensus view in Washington, a city that needs to change. Harmeet Dillon plans to try and change it. She's running for RNC chair. She joins us tonight to assess what we're seeing now. Harmeet, thanks so much for coming on. So he did the right thing. Is that a legal defense?
Not at all, Tucker. What we are seeing here is actually a cover-up of typical Washington proportions. In fact, it looks now like at least one of these troves of documents was identified before the midterm elections, but we're just hearing about it now. So it was concealed from the country to affect the outcome of an election. Secondly, it looks like there have been at least now 3 instances of these documents being moved. The first is out of the White House in 2017 as the Obama and Biden administrations were vacating. Secondly, into location number 1. Thirdly, into location number 2. And if the DOJ were serious about this, Tucker, they should be raiding all of Biden's homes and vacation destinations over the last several years to see, rifle through the sofa cushions, see if there are any classified documents there, because you can really have no confidence with this set of facts that we're at the end of the discovery of these documents. And an important distinction here is that President Trump had the absolute authority under federal law to declassify documents and also to keep documents for a period of time while he was looking through them for his archives before turning them over to the National Archives. Vice President Joe Biden has no such defense to that. And so I'm not buying any of this. And the other complicating factor here, Tucker, is that multiple members of the former vice president's family have close and questionable ties to foreign governments, including China and Ukraine. At least one of these documents pertains to the Ukraine. And there are serious federal penalties for giving access to foreign governments to these classified documents and a longer statute of limitations. This is a major criminal investigation issue, and brushing it under the rug by giving it to a recent United States attorney holdover from the Trump era is no substitute for a special counsel, which is how Democrats have treated the Mar-a-Lago documents. So there's a lot to see here, and we aren't at the end of it yet, Tucker.
He did the right. If you discover that I robbed a liquor store 6 years ago and I returned the money to the cash register, I'm still guilty of a crime.
No harm, no foul in Washington, apparently.
He did the right thing, yeah. Harmeet Dillon, running for chair of the Republican National Committee in Washington. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So this week, as promised, Republicans who now control the House set up a new committee modeled after the famous Frank Church Committee of the 70s to investigate the FBI and the intel agencies, which are playing what appear to be decisive roles in American politics. Now, that's an offense against democracy. You can have a democracy in which government agencies secretly work to control the outcome. That's tyranny, of course. No decent person should want that. But Republicans, Democrats rather than welcoming the scrutiny and the transparency, the sunlight, are responding with panic. Watch this.
Today, we have the first of their many demands on display, an open-ended investigation into whatever conspiracy theories may be headlining the right-wing echo chamber at the moment.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to H-Res 12, the Insurrection Protection Committee.
This is all about deep state nonsense.
Let's call it what it really is, the Republican Committee to Obstruct Justice.
Russia is one of our most dangerous adversaries. We're in the middle of a national security quagmire. And to undermine that through investigations of the FBI and Central Intelligence is going to be extremely dangerous.
The MAGA extremist fringe of the Republican Party will use this committee to push QAnon conspiracy theories and lies from Truth Social. They're going to use it to gin up fake investigations into non-existent scandals. I think we need to just start calling this the tinfoil hat committee.
Oh, so there's verification right there. If you're wondering if the federal agencies, FBI, CIA, and a bunch of others are actually being used as tools of the Democratic Party to change political outcomes, now we know for sure. Because if you're a government official and you are panicked at the idea that what you are doing will become public, you're doing something wrong by definition. And it's not just the intel agencies whose behavior they want to keep secret. Democrats in Congress also don't want you to have any idea where the $100 billion went that we've sent to Ukraine. So we spent $100 billion to Ukraine, and then Condi Rice, who's still talking about foreign policy in public, amazingly, announces this weekend that Ukraine is losing. Okay, so where'd all the money go? Well, you can't know that. It went to Zelensky and his wife. What'd they do with it? This weekend, Joe Biden announced that we're going to send still more billions to Ukraine. We've already gotten copies. A number of Ukrainians are personally benefiting from it, and you should know that. But the cost to us is profound. In fact, we're sending so much military equipment to Ukraine, to Zelensky and his wife, that we're running out of weapons for our own military to defend our own country. And that's not a guess. The Secretary of the Navy, Carlos del Toro, just said that out loud. Quote, with regards to deliveries of weapon systems for the fight in Ukraine, yeah, that's always a concern for us. If the conflict does go on for another 6 months or another year, it certainly continues to stress the supply chain in ways that are challenging. In other words, you can either defend Ukraine's borders or you can defend the United States of America. Which is it? Well, most members of Congress are choosing Ukraine, which tells you everything. But a small number are coming to their senses. In the House, Thomas Massie of Kentucky is one of them.
We've spent more in Ukraine, the U.S. Congress has, than we spend on all of our roads and bridges in an entire year. The entire infrastructure of this country, the roads and bridges, the real infrastructure. We don't spend as much on that here as we've spent on Ukraine in 9 months. I think that's despicable. Our priorities are all out of whack. And I'll finish with this. We're trying to get the documents here to find out where the money went. What we really need is a full audit.
So this is a crime against our country being perpetrated by the Democratic Party with the full buy-in of most Republicans. But a few have dissented. J.D. Vance just started in the U.S. Senate representing the state of Ohio, and he is leading the charge for sanity there. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. So you just got to the Senate. I mean, you've been there a week or something, and all of a sudden, Ukraine funding is up. What's your response to it?
Well, Tucker, I'd just like some transparency here. And if you set the background a little bit, Tucker, let's just remind ourselves that over the past 20 years, the bipartisan foreign policy consensus in Washington, D.C. has been wrong about Afghanistan. They've been wrong about Iraq. They've been wrong about Syria. They've been wrong about Lebanon. And now, with $120 billion of American taxpayer money on the line in a potential war against a nuclear power, they're basically saying, trust us. And my response is absolutely not. I don't trust you. I don't trust your motives. I certainly don't trust your judgment over the last 2 decades. And so I'd like to see how this money is being spent. Actually, by law, the Biden administration is supposed to tell us exactly how that money is being spent. And we're putting down a marker. Myself and Representative Dan Bishop of North Carolina is leading the charge in the House to make sure we get answers about how this money is being spent. Now, whether you support Ukrainian funding or not, the fundamental question is we deserve, and the American people deserve to know how their money is being spent, especially when we're talking about $120 billion of it.
So I just don't understand. This is like the simplest question ever posed. If we're sending more money to Zelensky than we're spending on our own infrastructure in this country, which Massey just said we are, how could you be against an audit of that? I don't understand.
Well, because I think a lot of people don't want to actually be forced to acknowledge that a lot of the money we've sent to Ukraine hasn't been well spent, that there's a lot of waste. There are a lot of probably very corrupt people who are getting rich off of it. And let me throw another statistic out there for you, Tucker. The Department of Homeland Security, the department that allegedly is supposed to secure our border, also does aviation security and a lot of other things. It receives $60 billion, half of the money that we've sent to Ukraine. Where is it all going? How is it being spent? It's our right to know.
Amen. I would love to hear the rejoinder to that. I would love to hear the argument against what you just said. Russian agent. Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, thank you so much.
Thanks, Tucker.
So Ukraine, like so many other big stories, like the death of George Floyd, like COVID, plays upon people's best instincts and subverts them. Their compassion, which is at the core of the American spirit, the care for other people. It takes that care and it twists it to dark ends. You're seeing some of the nicest people in Washington make some of the dumbest statements because they've been infected by this brain virus. So members of Congress who are, again, decent people are now trying to spend your money on a monument to a foreign leader in the U.S. Capitol. That's insane. And of course, that foreign leader is President Zelensky of Ukraine, who is dictatorial. It's not even a democratic country. He banned opposition parties, trying to ban an entire Christian denomination. The person leading this charge, we're sad to say, is a really nice guy who's pretty conservative, actually, Joe Wilson of South Carolina, Republican member. He's just sponsored legislation to display a bust of a foreign leader, Zelensky, in the Capitol building. The legislation he's putting forward would ensure that Zelensky's bust is on display, quote, in a suitable permanent location in the House of Representatives wing, so we can worship him daily. This is crazy. Let's hope we pull back. The administration is trying to ban gas stoves because climate means they can control everything about your life. But wholly unaddressed is the question of what you're going to cook on the stove, because food prices are out of control. The price of eggs especially. In California, the price of eggs is up nearly 500% since last year. Here's one report from San Diego.
It's killed over 57 million birds.
If you've noticed eggs are getting harder to come by, more empty shelves at the grocery store and much higher prices.
Paid over $7 for a 12-pack at Vons, and I said I'm not doing that again.
The bird flu started on the East Coast last March, and the effects of that are now being felt here in San Diego. This couple was one of many stopping by Hilliker's Ranch Fresh Eggs in Lakeside, telling us all their grocery stores were wiped out.
And the egg market is all controlled by supply and demand. The government sends out a price every week, and we follow it.
Which is why we're seeing those prices soar in the store.
So we saw this story and we thought, who can we consult about the price of eggs? And the first name that came to mind was Tiara Solom, a chicken enthusiast, a longtime chicken expert working informally for this show, and someone whose life has been vindicated by the current news. Tiara, thank you so much for coming on tonight. So you have been keeping chickens famously for years now. Now there is an egg shortage. You must feel like the smartest person in America.
You know, I will say my heart goes out to all the chickens that lost their lives to this horrendous bird flu that's going on. But for like local chicken owners and like small farms, this is great for us because now people are turning to us, wanting our eggs, and finally respecting chickens like they deserve.
Well, so that must feel really good, because I know you've been on the show a number of times. We've always been grateful to have you, and we've gotten a big response every time. And most has been positive. Some of it has been mocking. I'm sure that you have been mocked by your family, friends, and neighbors for keeping so many chickens, for being a chicken enthusiast. They're not making fun of you anymore, are they?
No, they're actually coming to me and wanting my eggs and finally needing me for something. And I'm like, oh, it's about time. You're welcome.
And do they look
now?
Yes. And do they look at the chickens a little differently?
You know, I feel like at this point, yes. Oh dear.
So really, I mean, the two themes I'm taking away from your life are self-sufficiency and love of animals. Is that fair to say?
You know, yeah, because finally, after the years of people making fun of my chickens and thinking that I'm weird that I have so many roosters and so many hens,
yes,
I'm now like, oh, told you so. Chickens are finally having their glow up, and I'm so grateful for it.
Now, but we should just say, in the interest of animal husbandry and accuracy, roosters don't lay eggs, correct?
No, so funny thing is my hens sleep in a different coop, and so right now we're in front of all my roosters, so a lot of people will probably be like, oh my gosh, roosters don't lay eggs. No shit. But this is easier, and if you remember last time, there's Bad Boy Halo from the very, very first time I was on. He's right there in the center. He was a little star.
Yeah.
He does his job well.
Can I just ask you, not to get too in the weeds on the chicken question, but how do you keep the roosters from killing each other?
Okay, so I'm a full believer in roosters are misunderstood. And if you raise them, hand raise them, hold them, handle them, they actually are all very nice. So my 6 roosters coexist really well with my other 6 hens. So I think it's all the way you raise them.
That's fair. I actually consulted someone with chickens after your last appearance, and we both agreed you were the chicken whisperer. Tiara, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on your vindication. And good luck with all those eggs. Thank you.
Thank you.
On out to take a look at what this looks like firsthand. These modern opium dens. He's the author, of course, of San Francisco. He joins us tonight. Michael Schellenberger, thank you so much for coming on. So you've reported on this. What do you think of it?
Well, Tucker, good to be with you. I mean, I think we all saw the Biden family struggling with Hunter Biden's addiction and fighting for Hunter Biden's life for many years. Any of us who have had friends or family suffering from drug addiction, we want to fight to rescue them so they can recover from addiction. What the Biden administration is considering doing is legalizing what are effectively addiction maintenance sites in the middle of all of our major cities, not just San Francisco. They want to spread them across the country. Naturally, they end up getting put in poor black neighborhoods. So you're looking at 2 different approaches to addiction. One is fighting for our loved ones to recover from addiction, and another is to basically give up and give into addiction, to give into the disease of addiction, which, I mean, every reputable addiction expert says is the absolute wrong approach. We know that you need to make an intervention. These drug sites, Tucker, attract drug dealers, violent drug dealers working for the Sinaloa cartel and drug users around the sites. That's why San Francisco, we got it shut down after just 6 months because it was such a disaster on the street. But the Biden administration is actively considering legalizing these modern opium dens, as one recovering addict refers to them, and making them possibly opened up in cities across the country.
So this is not a new idea. There's no social science to suggest it works. This happened all across Europe 30 years ago, in Zurich most famously, and they were shut down because it destroyed people. So on what basis are they doing this? What's the motive? I don't understand.
I mean, it is really crazy. I mean, you have to remember also there was a very active effort in the United States to shut down cigarette smoking. We actually got rid of smoking areas. We don't allow smoking, and now they're opening up fentanyl and meth smoking areas. It's all victimhood ideology, Tucker. It's the idea that people that are addicted to hard drugs are victims of the capitalist system, and they should just be enabled in their disease to self-medicate. It's a really twisted philosophy, but that's what we're seeing playing out now at the federal level.
But Marlboros are immoral. And at the same time, these same people are telling us that it's, quote, dangerous to use a natural gas stove in your home because of emissions, but they're not concerned about smoking meth? Like, at some point you have to wonder, like, what's really going on here? I'm wondering that. I don't know.
I mean, you know, you have to consider that it's part of a broader movement that thinks that Western civilization is a terrible thing, that we're founded on slavery and genocide, and so maybe when they start to do things that undermine civilization, there's a connection there.
I think you're right over the target on that. You know, don't have proof, but what's the other explanation? Michael Schellenberger, who again has done more reporting on this than the New York Times, and so we're always grateful to have you on. Thank you.
Good to be with you, Tucker.
More news straight ahead. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, it's hard to remember now, but it wasn't that long ago that Andrew Cuomo was not only the governor of New York, but also a legitimate hero in the Democratic Party. Do you remember that? Marijuana, who expanded Medicare, who passed strict gun control, who destroyed the NRA as a political force. He was the governor who more than any other person in this country, including Tony Fauci, effectively defended lockdowns, masking, and vaccines. In fact, in the fall of 2020, Cuomo won an Emmy Award for his daily COVID briefings. He was an actual celebrity. He seemed like a future president, and everybody said so. But within weeks of getting that Emmy, it began to fall apart. A number of women came forward to claim that Cuomo had once said impolite things in their presence. By the standards of Andrew Cuomo's many scandals in office, it seemed like nothing. But for reasons they never explained, Democratic leaders of his party in Washington, took this scandal very seriously. They described Cuomo's behavior as sexual harassment, and they called for his resignation. By summer, it had worked. He was out of office and irreparably disgraced. The people who hand out Emmys even took back their award and scrubbed Andrew Cuomo's name from their website. Andrew Cuomo was too immoral to share space with Hollywood actors. And that's pretty immoral. What exactly did Andrew Cuomo do wrong? He outlived his usefulness to the party. That's what he did. He stayed too long. Cuomo was in his 60s. He was white. He was male. He was someone whose demographic profile represented the Democratic Party of the past, not of the future. He talked like a mafia don negotiating garbage contracts. He was a little embarrassing. Because of that, his own people iced him, and they replaced him with someone who looked the part. No one cried when Andrew Cuomo resigned. They just moved on. The Democratic Party is not a sentimental place. It's hard not to think of Andrew Cuomo when you see what is happening to Joe Biden right now. Kamala Harris is certainly thinking about it. Harris was in a suspiciously good mood today. We know this because she was talking about electric school buses again. I love electric school buses, she raved. I just love them for so many reasons. Maybe because I went to school on a school bus. Raise your hand if you went to school on a school bus. Harris was grinning the whole time. And why wouldn't she be grinning? That senile white guy who claims to be her boss is finally going down, 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 down. It's a happy day at Kamala Harris's house. But it's not a happy day at Casa Biden. In fact, this is pretty clearly the beginning of the end for Joe Biden. We can't prove that. The future is unknowable. But holy smokes, it does not look good. And it doesn't look good in a very recognizable way. Somewhere in his basement rec room, drinking a Courvoisier on ice, Andrew Cuomo is chuckling to himself. He's seen this movie before. Joe Biden's own aides keep finding stacks of felonies he's left around the place, in his office, in his car. And instead of throwing this evidence in the fireplace, as under normal circumstances they would, they're sending these documents on to the Justice Department. That's not a good sign. Meanwhile, Biden's Attorney General, the most unscrupulous, unethical Attorney General this country has ever had, has somehow decided that actually, in order to maintain his unsullied record of nonpartisanship, he's going to have to pass these documents, these stacks of felonies, onto an independent counsel because that always works out well for a sitting president. And by the way, in this case, the independent counsel is a Republican. Good luck, Joe Biden. Happy 80th birthday. Here's Merrick Garland.
On the evening of November 4th, 2022, the National Archives Office of Inspector General contacted a prosecutor at the Department of Justice. It informed him that the White House had notified the archives that documents bearing classification markings were identified at the office of the Penn Biden Center on November 14th, pursuant to Section 600.2b of the Special Counsel Regulations. I assigned U.S. Attorney Lausch to conduct an initial investigation. On December 20th, President Biden's personal counsel informed Mr. Lausch that additional documents bearing classification markings were identified in the garage of the president's private residence in Wilmington, Delaware. This morning, President Biden's personal counsel called Mr. Lausch and stated that an additional document bearing classification markings was identified at the president's personal residence in Wilmington, Delaware.
They got Joe Biden. His own people got Joe Biden. But they don't want to wreck the party in the process. You following this? So the Department of Justice knew on November 4th that Joe Biden had committed crimes. November 4th was 4 days before a pivotal midterm election. So naturally, the DOJ didn't issue a press release about it. They didn't dispatch the FBI to raid Biden's home in Rehoboth and root through Dr. Jill's underwear drawer. No chance of that. Biden may be a terrible president, but he's still a Democrat. It's not like he's orange. So Merrick Garland, who is, and we cannot emphasize this enough, a soulless hack who will do anything the Democratic Party requires of him. Merrick Garland kept the news secret long enough to keep other Democrats out of the blast zone. Why hurt everybody else? They're just trying to hurt one guy. It's Joe Biden. So it wasn't until today that we knew Biden had been stashing state secrets in his Corvette. Here's Fox's Peter Ducey.
Okay. Classified material next to your Corvette. What were you thinking?
Let me, I'm going to get a chance to speak on all this, God willing, soon. But as I said earlier this week, people, and by the way, my Corvette's in a locked garage, okay? So it's not like you're sitting out in the street.
So
but anyway,
was in a locked garage?
Yes, as well as my Corvette. But as I said earlier this week, people know I take classified documents and classified materials seriously. I also said we're cooperating fully and completely with the Justice Department's review. As part of that process, my lawyers reviewed other places where documents from my time as vice president were stored, and they finished the review last night. They discovered a small number of documents of classified markings in storage areas and file cabinets in my home and my personal library. This was done in the case of the Biden Penn. This was done in the case of the Biden Penn Center. The Department of Justice was immediately, as was done, the Department of Justice was immediately notified, and the lawyers arranged for the Department of Justice to take possession of the document.
So that kind of answers that question. If you're still wondering where there is an organized effort within the White House to hurt Joe Biden, all you need to know is this: his staff keeps putting him out there in public to talk, which of course he can't do. He can barely read a prepared statement. Notice they did not do that during the last presidential campaign in 2020 because they knew it wouldn't help and they wanted the White House. And it helps even less now, but they're doing it. Why are they doing that now? Well, here's a guess. Right after the midterm elections in November, Joe Biden made it clear he had no plans to step aside and make way for Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom or Michelle Obama. I'm thinking of running again, he said, and he seemed to mean it. Oh, he shouldn't have said that. Next thing you know, he's got a special counsel crawling around his life, armed with subpoena power and a big staff and a big budget. Well, that's how things work in Washington, they'll tell you. Oh, no, it's not. No, it's not. Not unless you have no choice. If you're the President of the United States, a special counsel is the last thing you want. Why? Because you have no idea where that investigation will go. Ask Bill Clinton. He's still mad about it. And that's why there was no special counsel appointed when Hunter Biden's laptop proved that the Biden family was selling influence to the Chinese government. That's why no special counsel ever interviewed Tony Bobulinski. Because that was all before Joe Biden suggested he might run again and thwart the ambitions of the next generation of Democratic candidates. So Joe Biden is in very serious trouble tonight. But so potentially is the University of Pennsylvania, which paid Joe Biden $900,000 for doing essentially nothing. Why would Penn do that? Well, we can't say for sure, but we did notice that as soon as the university paid off Joe Biden, Penn began collecting tens of millions of dollars a year from donors in China. What was that? Maybe the special counsel will get to the bottom of it. We sure hope so. Meanwhile, everyone in Washington is pretending all of this is normal. They know it's not normal, but they're too afraid to say otherwise, except for Hank Johnson. Hank Johnson is not afraid. Hank Johnson is too dumb to be scared. Hank Johnson is the congressman from Atlanta who once famously worried that the island of Guam might, quote, capsize if too many people stood on one side of it. So Hank Johnson is a confirmed non-genius, but he knows a setup when he sees one. Watch this.
I'm suspicious of the timing of it. I'm also aware of the fact that things can be planted on people. Places and things can be planted. Things can be planted in places and then discovered conveniently. That may be what has occurred here. I'm not ruling that out.
So we laughed at Hank Johnson when he said Guam might capsize. We're not laughing at him now. The classified documents that Joe Biden, quote, stored in his garage and left at the Penn Center have been floating around for a full 6 years since Joe Biden left the vice president's office in January of 2017. So it's fair to assume they've been moved around a lot, but they're suddenly surfacing now, right after the midterm election? Why is that? No one has even attempted a convincing explanation. Instead, the media is pretending to argue that it's not a big deal in the first place that Joe Biden stored classified documents near his Corvette, because he admitted doing it when he got caught. And if you admit you've committed a crime, it's not a crime. Watch.
There is another key difference between the cases, though. In Biden's case, his attorneys reported the discovery and cooperated by turning them over immediately. That was not the case, of course, with Trump.
So in the Mar-a-Lago case, that really does appear to be a much more complicated case.
Of course, we're seeing a very big difference in what the Biden White House is doing around this and what Trump has done.
Night and day. You have the inadvertent, we don't even know if Biden had anything to do with it.
There are important distinctions between this and the swirl of controversy around Donald Trump and the documents at Mar-a-Lago.
What you see in that documents case is a textbook example
of the best possible way of handling the discovery of government documents after leaving office that should have been returned before leaving office. What you see is the exact opposite of Donald Trump's behavior.
These people are so filthy. If their team invaded Poland, they'd defend it. They'll say literally anything. This is the exact opposite of Donald Trump's behavior. All right, Larry O'Donnell. What they're forgetting is that the Trump raid took place in August, not that long ago, and a lot of people still remember the details from it. Trump and his lawyers met with federal investigators and showed them the classified documents that had been stored at Mar-a-Lago. And the FBI told Trump's lawyers, hey, put a lock on the door of the storage room. So they did. Then, when Trump's attorneys volunteered that there were more classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, volunteered, including the famous cocktail napkin, the FBI showed up with guns. And everyone knows that, including everyone you just saw in the clip. They are lying. And that's a problem because they're trying to obscure the saddest fact of modern life, which is there's now an obvious double standard in American justice. And that means we have no justice at all. That's a tragedy for this country. It'll be a long time before we recover from it. Joe Biden is partly responsible. He helped introduce this corruption into our system. And in one of those weird twists of fate that was probably inevitable but still feels like actual justice, Joe Biden is about to suffer greatly for it. Matt Whitaker is the former acting attorney general of the United States. He joins us tonight to assess. Mr. Whitaker, thank you so much for coming on. So explain, if you would, why the Trump case and the Biden case are really not as different as they're telling us on MSNBC.
Well, they're, on the one hand, they aren't different because we're dealing with classified documents and we're dealing with the statute that applies to them and their handling. But on the other hand, we're dealing with a former president who had a lot of latitude while president to declassify those documents that were in his possession. And Joe Biden, as vice president, had no power to declassify those documents that were in his possession. I think it's also an interesting fact in this case, Tucker, that the UPenn documents were in a manila folder marked personal. And so you open it up and all these marked classified documents are in a personal folder. This is not good for Joe Biden. However, I think ultimately, this is going to get down to where Jim Comey was at with Hillary Clinton. And it's going to come down to applying the standard of the statute to the facts as we have them. There's nothing in the statute about locked garages, certainly. And there's really nothing about whether or not you disclosed it as soon as you found it. I mean, Joe Biden had these for, to your point, over 6 years.
Right. So, I mean, whether or not you think this is an organized effort from within the Democratic Party to prevent Biden from running again, I think it's really clear that it is. I'm still confused as to why we don't know the details. Why haven't they told us why they were searching 6 years later for these documents? Who was doing it? Like, what is this? And why won't they tell us?
Well, there's a lot of facts we don't know. If you remember, famously in the Mar-a-Lago case, they spread out the documents on the carpet, took a picture, sent that to the media, made sure that everyone saw the evidence. In this case, we don't know much about the contents of the documents. We don't know much about why. We were told that it's because he was moving out of the Penn offices and his lawyers were going through the documents. But then why go through the garage? Why? And really, the other thing that is very concerning about this case is Merrick Garland waited 4 weeks to appoint a special counsel when he knew on December 20th that he had a major problem. And they were hoping that this never saw the light of day. And that's really a sad fact about this whole case, is they didn't want the American people to even know this had happened.
Yeah, and that is, I would say, the definition of corruption. We have a right to know.
Yeah.
Former Acting Attorney General of the United States, Matt Whitaker, thank you so much.
Thanks, Tucker. Great seeing you.
Whatever you think of Elon Musk, you got to be grateful for getting facts out there, which he has done since he took over Twitter. He's released a lot of information that answers questions about what was really happening behind the news stories we've been watching for the past 5 or 6 years. So today, Matt Taibbi of Substack, who's been one of the main reporters going through these files, reported on a new batch that shed light on the Russia collusion hoax. So in 2018, under Devin Nunes, who was then running the House Intel Committee, that committee prepared a confidential memo confirming that the Department of Justice had spied on the Trump campaign, which is completely illegal, over the top, without recent precedent. So rather than address this as an attack on core civil liberties, Democrats in the House dismissed Devin Nunes as a tool of Putin. Adam Schiff and Dianne Feinstein claimed that a Twitter hashtag calling for the memo's release was, quote, linked to Russian influence operations. Okay, so if you wanted to see the facts about domestic spying, you were working for Putin. But that was a lie. We now know for sure. Newly revealed documents prove that Twitter and these Democrats knew it was false and kept saying it. We know this because of Matt Taibbi's reporting. He's the author of Griftopia, and he joins us tonight. Matt, thank you so much for coming on. So I'm not sure if I summarized that fairly, but I'll hand it to you. What do we know now?
Well, I think we know a lot about how a lot of these Russiagate stories came to be. People just lied. In this case, even when Twitter had more or less conclusive proof that there were no Russians involved in the release, the memo hashtag, even when they informed media and elected officials, even when they pleaded with members of the Senate not to go public because it would make them look, quote, foolish, they went ahead and did it anyway, despite being informed of the truth that, of course, Twitter knew internally because they were looking at the raw data. So this is, I think, a template of how these stories came to be. Politicians and the media just simply overrode what the facts were, and things being the way they were, there was a real mania at the time. This was the peak of the sort of McCarthyite hysteria about this subject. There was just no turning back.
So 5 years later, we're now engaged in a hot war with Russia, which we are. I mean, there are Americans fighting the war in Ukraine against Russia. So I wonder how much of this was designed to divert attention from things they didn't want exposed, and how much of it was an effort to whip Americans into a frenzy about Russia.
I think at the time, it seemed much more about diverting attention from the Nunes memo. Because remember, there were two sets of fake stories that came out at the time. One was that the story was being amplified by Russian bots. And that story, by the way, was repeated by virtually every major news organization in America and in some other countries, too, like the CBC did that story. But the other story was that the Nunes memo was not just fake and not just completely devoid of any important revelations, but grounds for him to potentially be removed from his position at the Intel Committee. MoveOn.org had a petition about it. Of course, we found out 2 years later through the Inspector General's report that virtually everything in the Nunes memo had been proved correct. So I think that's what they were doing. They were just trying to deflect from an uncomfortable truth by calling him a Russian proxy.
Really quick, since I know that you're keeping score, has any news organization that printed false allegations then apologized now in light of the truth coming out?
Not only have they not apologized, but not one of the news organizations that I reached out to for comment about this particular issue responded to me. Which suggests to me that they know exactly what happened. They know exactly how irresponsible they were. Again, this isn't a left or right issue. This is just simply a fact issue. They needed to be able to ask Twitter what was going on, and I don't think most of these news organizations did that, and now they're reluctant to admit it.
Yeah, and they're attacking you. Matt Taibbi, thank you for your reporting and for telling us about it tonight. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Tucker.
So Devin Nunes ultimately left the House Intel Committee. In fact, he left the House of Representatives. Eric Swalwell of California went on the Intel Committee, and now he's getting booted off the Intel Committee, and he's very mad about it. He went on television yesterday to claim he's being ejected from this committee out of, quote, pure vengeance. Watch.
Chris, the only person who supports this is my wife, who is like, great, you're going to be home to change more diapers. I love it. But the truth is, Chris, it's purely vengeance. And I just want to walk your viewers through this because this happened nearly 10 years ago. The FBI told me that someone who had been helping our campaign in a district with 35% Asian Americans may be working with the Chinese government. I did what I hope every one of my colleagues would do, which was to help the FBI get this person out of the country. It's only now that a Trump intel official had leaked my cooperation to suggest that there was some wrongdoing on my part.
Yeah, it's just political vengeance, says Eric Swalwell. But that's not true. And actually, we did some reporting on this because what actually happened is important. So the last director of national intelligence went to Capitol Hill and briefed the intel committees about foreign espionage threats. And at the time, he recommended to the so-called Gang of Eight that Eric Swalwell, the man you just saw, be removed from the House Intel Committee, the most sensitive committee in the House of Representatives. Why? Because he'd been compromised by China. And that's not an overstatement. A Chinese spy helped get Eric Swalwell elected to the Congress. A Chinese spy raised money for Eric Swalwell's campaign. A Chinese spy campaigned for Eric Swalwell. A Chinese spy placed staffers in Eric Swalwell's office. But the main problem, and the main problem that the intel community had with Eric Swalwell, is that he had sex with a Chinese spy. Now, we've made fun of him over the years for this, but it's real. And Swalwell has never denied it because he can't deny it. And everyone who's looked into it knows that it's true. So we're not here to cast aspersions on Eric Swalwell's personal life. But if you're having sex with a Chinese spy, sorry, you can't be on the House Intel Committee. It's that simple. He joins us tonight. Pedro, what do you make of this?
Well, Tucker, thanks for having me. Well, the system that failed and resulted in the FAA grounding all those flights is actually 30 years old, and it's not due for an update for another 6 years. And I was actually trapped at an airport yesterday for several hours, and ultimately it's probably going to take me longer to get back to my family. But when I was thinking about this clearly, I was filled with a warm and fuzzy feeling because our transportation czar is married to a man and believes roads are racist. So all of this is actually progress, except it's not. Change is not the same thing as progress, obviously. We're witnessing the third worldification of U.S. infrastructure, and Mayor Pete is actually the ideal guy to oversee this decline. He has all of the right credentials under the rubric of liberalism. I think that's important. People say he's not qualified. He actually is. He has all of these important but ultimately meaningless credentials stapled to his goofy forehead, and he can claim status with a sacred victim group. Pete Buttigieg does not ask questions when the government wants to ban your gas stove to fight climate change, and when it can't put airplanes safely in the sky. He also has all the right bromides at hand. In other words, he's ready to say a whole lot of nothing.
It's just weird that people put up this. I mean, it's one thing, you've got all your freaky theories about sex changes or whatever, but ultimately you kind of have to make sure the planes don't crash, that they can take off in the first place, the power grid works. People should not put up with the degradation in the basics. Why are they?
I think because we've gotten used to this. It seems like inertia, and it's not just happening on the level of government. I mean, remember, think back to the summer of St. George Floyd. Citigroup, one of the sleaziest organizations, one of the sleaziest financial institutions in the world, rehabilitated itself. It rebranded itself not by changing structurally, like you said, you would expect an organization like that to change structurally. Instead, Citi just came out against racism. And then suddenly, people stopped demanding change, and they settled for, well, Citi opposes racism, and that's good enough for me.
That is so true that I'm chuckling at it. You're absolutely right. Pedro Gonzalez, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the White House press secretary doesn't, despite the title, exist to convey information, but to withhold it. And in this White House, the press secretary bans any reporter who asks real questions. And that includes, and it especially includes, a man called Simon Atiba. Simon Atiba is the most famous and we would say finest reporter in all Africa. And that means that Karine Jean-Pierre does not want to talk to him at all. She hasn't called on him in more than 4 months. Now the White House says that Karine Jean-Pierre will not meet with Simon Atiba until next year, which of course means never. Simon Atiba is with Today News Africa. He joins us tonight. Simon, thank you so much for coming on. So on what grounds will she just not meet with you?
First of all, thank you for having me talk on your show. It's the most watched show, and I'm always glad to be here. You know, as the voice of Africa in the U.S., I love the U.S. I always love freedom. I love democracy. And even if you paid me $100 million to move to China, I will not move to China. I would like to be in the U.S. because the ideals of the U.S. is the ideals, you know, those are the things that I love, and those are the things that most Africans also love. I feel like Karine Jean-Pierre, she has no clue what's happening in Africa. She doesn't understand that China is expanding propaganding and also spreading disinformation and misinformation against the U.S., that they are competing against the U.S. Competition is good, but then when competition comes with destroying democracy, and that becomes a problem. And she doesn't know that. That's why she discriminates against me. She's not called on me for the past 4 months. And so last week I tried to meet with her. She told me she will not meet with me until 2024, maybe.
I wonder if it's the case that she doesn't call on you because she doesn't want to hear about Chinese influence in Africa.
Yes, I feel like she doesn't take serious questions. She wants to have questions that she's received in advance. She doesn't want. I ask tough questions. I may ask her about, many things that happen in Africa, including immigration, for instance. How does it make sense that Africans who are here, for instance, who came legally, apply for asylum legally, have to wait for 6 years for their cases to even be heard. And their cases are not heard after 6 months, but they see people crossing, just walking across the border, and then they have all the benefit the next day. How is that fair to Africans?
Well, that seems like a completely reasonable question, and you have the authority to ask it. Simon Atiba, we are rooting for you in the White House briefing room. We hope they'll change their minds and stop what they're doing. But in the meantime, you always have a place here on the show. Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight it is Friday, so we are thrilled to be able to open the show tonight with some rare good news. That doesn't happen very often, and when it does, we celebrate. One of the main problems with the U.S. government is that there's no way to know exactly what it's doing because you're not allowed to know. More than 1 billion federal documents, 1 billion, have been declared classified, and that means they're off limits to you and all other ordinary American citizens who don't work for the government. You're not allowed to see them, despite the fact they belong to you. Now, no matter what you may have heard, the point of the system is not to protect the country from foreign adversaries. Under the Biden administration, we don't even bother to do that anymore. No, the point of this system is to take power from the voters and the officials they elect and hand that power to the permanent bureaucracy in Washington. It's infuriating, and over time it is dangerous. But for once, we can report some meaningful pushback against this regime of secrecy and deceit. Kevin McCarthy of California became Speaker of the House last Friday. And in one of his first big policy changes, he is pledging to let Americans see, quote, all that happened at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. And that means finally releasing the roughly 14,000 hours of surveillance footage from that day that as of tonight remain hidden. Watch this.
Yeah, I think the public should see what has happened on day. I've watched what Nancy Pelosi did, where she politicized it, where for the first time in the history as a speaker, not allowing the minority to appoint to a committee, to pick and choose. We watched the politicization of this. I think the American public should actually see all what happened instead of a report that's written for a political basis. And I think the answer. We're looking through that. I want to be very thoughtful about it, but yes, I'm engaged to do that.
Well, yeah. After 2 full years, after a highly publicized and highly politicized congressional committee, after endless grandstanding in the media, after unprecedented political crackdowns, after nearly 1,000 arrests, after all of that, Americans, yes, they do have a right to know what actually happened on January 6th. That's what Kevin McCarthy said. Who could argue otherwise? What's the counter-argument? Well, there is one, and Democrats have been making it in court, and that's why the footage from that day is still hidden. Here's an actual quote from an actual brief filed in an actual federal court by an actual left-wing U.S. attorney called Channing Phillips. Quote, national security interests could be harmed by the disclosure of the sealed CCTV videos from the Capitol. Once the capabilities of the U.S. Capitol interior surveillance camera, including its position and whether it pans, tilts, or zooms, is disclosed to the public via the release of a single video from that camera, the cat is out of the bag. So that's it right there. You can't know whether the Capitol's surveillance cameras pan, tilt, or zoom. And if you do know, America is in peril. It's completely absurd. every human movement in the United States Capitol is recorded by cameras. And you already knew that because the same is true in virtually every public building in the Western Hemisphere. That is not a secret. And of course, it's not the secret the Democrats fear you might learn if you saw the tape. They're probably a lot more concerned about whether you'll discover how many law enforcement agents actively helped January 6 protesters enter the building that day. Some of them definitely did. We know that for a fact because we have the tape. Watch.
Police are squabbling with protesters. Oh, there we go. And they just breached the Capitol again.
So you saw the barricades come down in front of the Capitol. In some cases, it was not actually the police who took them down. But we still don't know the identity of the people who did. Why don't we? Well, Julie Kelly has just reported on a remarkable moment in the ongoing trial of a man called Richard Barnett. Barnett is the man photographed with his feet famously on Nancy Pelosi's desks on January 6th. Under cross-examination from Barnett's defense lawyer this week, a U.S. Capitol Police commander called Carlson Mendoza admitted that unidentified but apparently highly trained agent provocateurs were leading the crowd that day. Here's the exchange. The defense attorney asks, quote, "Would it be fair to say that at least some of the leading edges of that crowd, they contained bad people or provocateurs? Is that fair?" Mendoza's response, quote, "It's fair." Mendoza went on to confirm that these provocateurs were, quote, highly trained, violent people who work together and coordinate together. Well, that's a remarkable admission. But who were these people? Under oath, the director of the FBI has refused to deny that these provocateurs were working with federal law enforcement. Indeed, Christopher Wray of the FBI has refused to confirm or deny that FBI agents dressed as Trump supporters and breached the Capitol. Watch this.
Did you have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol on January the 6th prior to the doors being opened?
Again, I had to be very careful.
It should be a no. Can you not tell the American people no? We did not have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters positioned inside the Capitol.
Gentleman's time has expired. You should not read anything into my decision not to share information.
Director Wray,
confidential.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Well, that's just completely outrageous. First, it seems very obvious the FBI did have confidential sources dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol. But the fact is, we as Americans have an absolute right to know. How many FBI agents or informants participated in the January 6 riots? Why can't we know? There's no good reason. FBI Director Christopher Wray wants to keep the surveillance footage hidden so we can't know. Again, the real secret here is not whether the cameras in the Capitol pan, tilt, or zoom. It's ridiculous. The real secret is what really happened there. So for 2 years, the Department of Justice has fought the release of this footage. But still, some of that footage has emerged. Take a look at this tape. It was obtained by BuzzFeed. It was released only after a federal judge rejected the DOJ's claim that this particular footage needed to stay secret on, quote, national security grounds. National security grounds. The footage covers a 15-minute period on January 6th from 2:25 p.m. to 2:40 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, that's right in the middle of the so-called insurrection. For context, 2:26 p.m. is around when Mike Pence, then the vice president, was evacuated from the Capitol. These are images from a surveillance camera at the Senate wing of the complex, and they show people calmly walking around taking pictures. Not much of a riot. Now, that's relevant because the DOJ is charging some of the people who entered the Capitol around this time, probably including some of the people in those frames, with endangering the safety of Mike Pence. They're saying the Capitol itself was a restricted area because Mike Pence was present. But it does not appear from that footage that it's true. Where exactly was Mike Pence at the time? People are doing jail time as a result of assumptions about that question. But the rest of us can verify it because the surveillance footage is still classified for national security reasons. We should see it. That footage might also show when exactly Capitol police officers began CPR on Roseanne Boylan, one Trump supporter who died that day. And that would be important to know as well for her family and for the rest of us. We might also learn about why one Capitol Hill police officer on January 6th, a man called Khalid Johnson, was wearing a MAGA hat as he seemed to coordinate with some of the protesters. That footage was shot by journalist Ford Fisher. You're seeing an image of it on your screen right now. And maybe we'll learn more about the Chewbacca guy, the guy in the Viking hat, his activities during January 6th. He's the man now serving almost 4 years behind bars for declining a police officer's half-hearted request that he take the party elsewhere. More than half of all murders in the United States are not solved at this point because law enforcement, including federal law enforcement, can't get its act together sufficient to solve those murders. And that guy has had his life destroyed and is spending 41 months in prison. Why? Did he do something we're not aware of? The surveillance footage would show us and answer that question. But big picture, if you don't want another January 6th, if you want to avoid another riot like that, you'd want as much of the footage to come out as possible. Instead, our government has been using the information blackout it claims is necessary for national security in order to do what they usually do under the cover of classification law, and that's lie to us. Joe Biden just claimed on camera that right-wing insurrectionist racists killed a Capitol police officer called William Evans. William Evans, of course, was murdered at a checkpoint by a supporter of the Nation of Islam.
3 months after January 6th, while they're still cordoning off the Capitol because threats by these sick insurrectionists continue to be profligated on the internet. Again, all America saw what happened. What Officer Evans was killed defending the checkpoint he'd had to go through to get up to the Capitol because of these god-awful sick threats.
Evil thrives in secrecy. That used to be obvious to all Americans. We have a right to know, and moreover, transparency is the only solution. And it looks like we're going to get some. And that's thanks to the new Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, and to the small group of Republicans who pushed him in that direction. Matt Gaetz of Florida is one of them who joins us now. Congressman, thank you so much for coming on. How gratifying is it you didn't want Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker, you said it many times. He became Speaker, and now he's doing something that you've been calling for. How gratifying is this?
Bravo, Speaker McCarthy. This was not an agreement that we had at the beginning of last week, but as the week progressed, Speaker McCarthy, to his great credit, understood this was important to a great many of us. And when we get this 14,000 hours out, we're going to be able to see the extent to which the federal agents and assets that were present that day may or may not have increased the level of criminal acuity. We're going to be able to see their coordination with one another. And we're also going to be able to see if there's exculpatory evidence that would show that people never intended to violate a law, even though they might have been technically out of compliance with whatever the standard was at that time based on the vice president's movements that they probably weren't aware of anyway. It is interesting, though, that at every time from the JFK files to 9/11 to now January 6th, it's our own government, it's our own Department of Justice that seems to stand in the way of transparency. The Speaker of the House is now fulfilling the commitment he made to us, and he deserves a great deal of credit for it.
Amen. I feel the same way, and I had similar views about McCarthy to the ones you had, but I'm so thankful for this. Really quickly, we want to be fair. You serve in Congress. Can you think of any legitimate reason, real reason, tied to actual national security concerns to keep this footage secret?
No, I mean, we already know from whistleblower interviews that there were federal agents and assets that were on the grounds that day. And I think what they really want to do is protect those people. They don't want the answers to the questions about coordination, exculpation, criminal acuity. And I think that is what they are trying to preserve. Usually when the Department of Justice is standing in the way of disclosure, it is because they are trying to protect against embarrassment, not protect our safety.
Right. It's self-protection.
Yes.
Not protecting the nation. Matt Gaetz, nicely put. Great to see you tonight. Thank you so much for this. I appreciate you coming on. So Joe Biden's staff discovered, and Joe Biden admitted, that he'd been storing classified documents in several locations: his office, his garage near his Corvette, something called the Penn Biden Center. The White House physician just announced that as a result of a routine colonoscopy, they found more documents. Just kidding. Possible, though. But you have to kind of wonder, and we're waiting, by the way, for classified documents to be found at the swimming pool made famous by Corn Pop, but it's just a matter of time before that happens. What's weird is that the DOJ has not raided any of Joe Biden's properties, even though we've been told for many months now that these are very serious crimes. A civilian employee of the Department of Defense went to prison last year for taking a couple of classified documents to her hotel room. So you can see what happens to civilians or normal people when classified documents are, quote, mishandled. Buck Sexton has spent a lot of time around classified documents. He once was a CIA officer. He's now the host, thank heaven, of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show. He joins us tonight. Buck, thanks a lot for coming on. So, I mean, this was the world that you lived in, that you worked in. Assess the DOJ's response to what Biden did.
Well, if you were a normal person, which you were getting at before, who happened to work in the national security apparatus, you lived in constant fear of even the smallest infraction of classified protocols. I saw adults break down in tears because they thought they may have misplaced something even inside what was overall a classified facility. And certainly your career and perhaps even your freedom could be taken from you with even the most minute, I mean, even the smallest infraction. But as we know, a true tyranny isn't the strict enforcement of all laws. It is the disparate enforcement of laws. So that's been the case for the powerful and the everyday folks in national security all along. But now you have to add to that the Democrat layer and what we see here with Joe Biden, which is obviously a sense. I mean, the fact that he brought up that his Corvette was in the garage and it's locked. Tucker, if I had said that to security personnel at the CIA, don't worry about it, bro. I've got all the docs at home locked up in a safe or whatever in my own private residence. They would have taken my badge, told me my clearances were revoked, and I would probably be awaiting federal charges. Joe Biden thinks like, no big deal, man. I got a lot of money from the Penn Biden Center. People think I'm important. That's the situation we're seeing unfold, and people recognize how outrageous it is.
Well, yeah, and the document sat there for 6 years. I mean, I think there's more to the story. Just my guess. But Buck Sexton, thanks for the perspective.
Well, the big part of it, Tucker, is, who found it? Because everyone seems to be saying that they think this is an effort to push Biden aside. I want to know, look, it's not hard to get rid of a few documents here and there if they're classified. So the big question that we're still asking here is this just the meeting of tremendous Biden incompetence, which has, been going on for 40 plus years, with opportunism from within the national security apparatus to push him? That's what we want to know.
I think this is make way for Michelle. Just my view, not provable. We'll see. Buck Sexton, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So the Biden administration has been actively encouraging Americans, young people, to smoke more weed and meth. They're sending crack pipes to crack addicts. But one Republican member of Congress wants to burn a cigar in his office, and liberals are hysterical. We'll speak to him. Striking a blow for freedom. Plus, it turns out arming Ukraine is not just a bad idea. It's actually an active threat to our own national security. The U.S. military is running out of weapons to defend ourselves. Not a guess. Details ahead. So when the first Pfizer COVID shot came out, if you listened carefully, you understood that Pfizer understood that the company had no idea what the long-term consequences of the drug might be. And some people piped up and said, wait a second, what are the long-term effects? Shut up! Anti-vax, anti-science person. Well, it was worth asking those questions because in the months since, we have learned that that shot causes heart inflammation in young people, which can be deadly, as well as decreased sperm counts. And then today, just hours ago, the CDC says its vaccine safety data link, which tracks vaccine injuries, has identified a new link between Pfizer's new booster COVID shot and strokes in people over the age of 65. The CDC reports that its data, quote, raised a question of whether people over the age of 65 were, quote, more likely to have a stroke in the 21 days following vaccination compared with days 22 to 44 following a vaccination. An investigation is now underway. There's a lot going on with the nation's health. People have an awful lot of questions about it. There's a huge amount of lying around it. We're trying to separate fact from fiction. We'll bring you what we know on Monday. So what's interesting is that for the past 2 years, the Biden administration has been actively encouraging drug use among Americans. Not just weed. There are dispensaries on every corner in every town in the country all of a sudden. Some people are getting rich from it. Smoke more weed. It's good for you. But also meth and crack. The Biden administration has literally sent crack pipes to crack addicts, something we never thought would happen. But they're doing it. On the other side, you have Republicans. They're back in control of the House of Representatives. And because they are, on the House side, Republican members who want to smoke tobacco once again can. They couldn't when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker because she had banned tobacco smoking in the Capitol complex back in 2007. Now, you'd think this would be non-controversial in a country where you're allowed to smoke meth in a park. Kids are encouraged to smoke weed. But it's very controversial because unlike meth and weed and crack, tobacco is bad. Several members of the Capitol Press Gallery are horrified by this, and they're complaining. So you have to kind of wonder, why is tobacco so dangerous? Well, we thought we would ask a member of Congress who uses it, who smokes an occasional cigar. Troy Nehls joins us tonight. Congressman, grateful that you're here, willing to stand up for the most American of all pleasures, which is tobacco. Sorry to say it, it's true, it founded the country. Tell us why it's important for you to burn a cigar occasionally in your office.
Well, thank you for having me, Tucker. It's all about freedom. It's interesting that dishonest media and those they want to complain about a little smoke coming out of my cigar. They don't want to talk about the inflation or the crime or the southern border. And people have been enjoying cigars. Nations leaders, world leaders, from Winston Churchill to United States presidents, from Andrew Jackson to Theodore Roosevelt, Nixon, JFK, they like smoking their cigars. We even know that Bill Clinton, he enjoyed a good cigar every once in a while. So I don't know what all the hoopla is all about. You're right. In 2007, under Pelosi, she said you cannot smoke cigars in the Capitol building, i.e. you can't smoke cigars on the House floor or in committee hearings. But it did not include members' offices. So a member's house office, we've always been able to smoke cigars. There are many of us in the Cigar Caucus, about 30 of us, that enjoy a good cigar in our office, and we do so. Nancy Pelosi, for 2 years, I've been smoking cigars. Nobody complains about it. But now they want to come after us because we're in the majority. This is typical from the left. They want to infringe on our rights. They want to complain about our smoke. They're probably complaining about maybe my aftershave or the color of my tie. It doesn't end.
But if you were smoking weed or meth, no one would say anything. What is it about tobacco, which was a religious sacrament for the American Indians, for all the Mesoamerican Indians? What is it about tobacco that triggers them so profoundly, do you think?
I don't know. Maybe they've never tried one. But you look at a nice Ashton cigar. It's a beautiful cigar. It's mild, mate Arturo Fuento. It's a great cigar. Try one.
Oh, I have. Congressman Troy Nehls, striking a blow for freedom. That is the smell of freedom. We appreciate your coming on tonight and standing up for Americanism.
Thank you. God bless.
Great to see you. Well, Joe Biden has just announced that we're going to, against our own interests, send missile batteries, armored vehicles, and a whole lot more to Ukraine forever. So, against our interests, well, that may be an understatement. We may be disarming our own country by doing this. A reporter just asked the Secretary of the Navy, Carlos del Toro, whether the military, quote, might get to the point where it has to make the decision whether it needs to arm itself or Ukraine. Del Toro did not blow off the question. He answered it this way, yeah. That's always been a concern for us. That's where we are. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis is a senior fellow at Defense Priorities and joins us tonight to assess. Sure appreciate your coming on. So this is it seems to me, as a civilian, a pretty serious admission by the Secretary that we're disarming ourselves on behalf of Ukraine.
Well, it is. And, you know, this really underscores what is, to me, a really big problem with this whole situation, to where the administration doesn't appear to really have a strategy or even an idea what it's trying to do, what it's trying to accomplish on the ground in Ukraine. Well, I mean, we've sent HIMARS, we've sent some of the Patriots, we've now putting in the Bradleys, potentially Strikers, you know, M109 Paladins. I mean, the numbers just keep going on. And look, this is not fat. This is not some of the older stuff like we gave them at the beginning. Now you're getting into the bone, and the question's going to be, how long are you going to do this? How much are you going to give away? And what's going to happen when we start getting into really putting our security at risk? And here's something I really want to raise, Tucker, which hasn't been even addressed by the administration so far, is that after this probable winter offensive that Russia's potentially days or weeks away from launching. No matter how it goes, whether Russia has a big success or whether the Ukraine side comes in, you can be sure that other people are going to say, hey, man, we gave them all this stuff, but now then Russia's winning, so we have to give them even more to stave off victory.
Well, exactly.
Or they'll say, oh, no, the Ukraine's doing good. Now we've got to give them even more so they can keep going. The bottom line is that there's always going to be asked for more. And at some point, our interests have to enter into the conversation. And so far, they haven't.
No, they haven't. And really quick, I mean, Ukraine, when I checked this morning, is in Europe. So where are the European nations? Why is this the sole duty of the United States? Where's Germany and Great Britain and all the other freedom fighters in Europe?
Yeah, that's a big issue that I've also, very near and dear to our heart here at Defense Priorities, because, look, we want to shift some of this burden where it belongs to the people who have the most at stake. It can't be America's primary responsibility to do these things. And, and you do have that. That's exactly what people are asking. And at some point, we have to change that.
Yeah, it seems like lunacy from the outside. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis of Defense Priorities, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So Wells Fargo used to be the biggest mortgage lender in the United States. Now they're downsizing. Instead of offering mortgages to everyone, they're going to focus instead on giving mortgages to, quote, individuals and families in minority communities. In other words, not lending money to white people. Is that illegal? The journalist and filmmaker Chris Rufo has been on this story. We should tell you that Governor DeSantis of Florida has appointed Rufo to the board of trustees at the new College of Florida in an effort to end the ideological rot there. Chris Rufo joins us now. Chris, thanks so much for coming on. This is another one of those stories that you feel like this has to be too far. Tell us what you know about it.
Well, what we're seeing is the emergence of two separate standards based on race and the disappearance of this idea that everyone should be treated equally under the law and then judged according to the behavior. I think it's important for conservatives to understand that these programs are not simply a hypocrisy or kind of two sides of a same standard. They're actually entirely different standards. We're creating a moral basis based on identity that is seeking to supplant or replace a moral basis on behavior. And these companies are just following the lead of the academics, the universities, the activists on the left. And they're saying we're going to not judge people on their financial solvency or reliability, but on the basis of a racial revenge narrative. And they're saying simply, we're going now to judge you on the basis of race. It's illegal, but in so many cases, they're getting away with it.
But I don't understand. I mean, redlining was the original sin, we've been told, for 50 years of the mortgage industry, right? Deciding we're not going to lend to areas because a certain race of people live in them. And that's exactly what Wells Fargo is doing. Why doesn't the federal government shut down Wells Fargo with armed agents tonight? I don't understand how this can happen.
Because, Tucker, this is the basis of so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is not a simple colorblind equality represented in the 14th Amendment or the Civil Rights Act. It's an entirely new philosophy. It's based on critical race theory, and it's this idea that we should treat people differently based on race. And as long as we have the right racial hierarchy embedded in that philosophy, you can do essentially whatever you want. They're not doing anything different in the Biden administration because this is part and parcel of the ideology that they've adopted.
But when Wells Fargo announces we're not writing mortgages for white people and there's not some sort of mass response, you got to wonder, like, what is going on here? Chris Rufo, I sure appreciate your coming on and bringing us that story, and congrats on your appointment to the board of that college in Florida. Thank you. We'll be right back. Oh, good evening and welcome to a special edition of Tucker Carlson tonight. You may not remember a whole lot about it, but the second and final presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump is actually a fascinating piece of history, and it's well worth re-watching. We actually did it today because we had time off. Now, Trump showed up with a political kill shot. He had proof that Joe Biden had been selling access to the U.S. government to hostile foreign regimes. Trump knew that, and we know it, from the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop. But Joe Biden, as you may recall, did not even respond. That's Russian disinformation, he said. And then he went on the offense. Show us your tax returns, Biden demanded. Show us your tax returns. And of course, Trump refused. Biden, by contrast, already set up a website called JoeBiden.com to showcase his own recent tax returns because he had nothing to hide. Unlike Donald Trump, you could trust Joe Biden. That was the message. Now, why are we telling you this tonight? Why are we dredging up history? Well, we're doing it because 2 years later, the roles have reversed in a bewildering and pretty remarkable and kind of hilarious way. So we now have Donald Trump's tax returns. House Democrats grabbed them, law and precedent and privacy be damned, privacy. And they released them to the public because Donald Trump is orange and bad and has no protections under the Bill of Rights. So now that we have Trump's tax returns, what do they show? Well, they show that Donald Trump got a lot poorer once he got into politics. In fact, he may be the only person in Washington you could say that about. Whatever you think of Trump, it turns out he was not in it for the money, hardly. As for Joe Biden, well, you can't say that about Joe Biden. Joe Biden has never had a private sector job. For more than 50 years, he has worked at your expense for the U.S. government. Yet somehow he's gotten rich in the process. How did that happen? How did Joe Biden do that? Well, Joe Biden does not want you to know. So now, this is the great part, Joe Biden is the one who is hiding his tax returns. JoeBiden.com no longer links to Joe Biden's tax returns for the years 2016 to 2018. As of tonight, those links have been deactivated. If you go there, you will find yourself taken by force to a Democratic Party fundraising website. So, in other words, stop asking questions and give us money. But it does make you wonder what exactly was happening from 2016 to 2018 that Joe Biden might want to hide. Fair question, but no one in the media seems interested in finding the answer. We do know that during that same period, 2016 to 2018, there was a lot of weird accounting going on at Joe Biden's house in Delaware, the same house where yet another cache of classified documents was just found, yet another. In 2018, Hunter Biden was looking to rent property in California. Now, on a background check form as part of his rental application, Hunter Biden claimed that, in fact, he owned the Delaware house that Joe Biden, his dad, says that he owned. So they're both claiming to own the same house. Hunter Biden then also listed the address of that house as his primary residence on his driver's license, an official government document. Now, this is the very same home where Joe Biden has spent a third of his presidency, in addition to his beach house in Rehoboth, without maintaining any visitor logs. Now, this is worth knowing. Now, we don't know this because the New York Times or ABC News dispatched one of its crack reporters who found it. No. We know it because an anonymous Twitter account called @JJTalking found this background check form on Hunter Biden's laptop. Miranda Devine of the New York Post has also done extensive reporting on it. And the document raises quite a few questions, not all of which we can answer, by the way. But the obvious ones include, did Hunter Biden actually buy his father's home in Delaware? Was he making rent payments to live there? Does that amount that he was paying refer to another property? It was a big amount. On the form, Hunter Biden claims he's paying nearly $50,000 a month in housing costs. $50,000 a month. Where'd that money come from? You wouldn't think Hunter Biden would be able to earn that kind of money. Now, at the time, this was pre-laptop, but Hunter Biden had already been thrown out of the U.S. Navy for cocaine use. He'd already abandoned a rental car with a crack pipe inside, along with his ID. He had already left his wife for his sister-in-law. Now, all this was public information. So how did a disgraced drug addict with no job skills make enough money to make a $50,000 a month payment? Who was paying him? How much were they paying him? And why were they paying him? And by the way, why do classified documents keep appearing in homes that Hunter Biden lived in? Those seem like fair questions. We have a right to ask them. Joe Biden doesn't feel like answering them. Watch. Are you sure there are no more class? Well, he's not sure. He's not sure of anything at this point, including what direction he's walking. But they're not even bothering his staff to answer questions anymore on this topic because every statement they've given so far, including statements carefully crafted by their attorneys, has proven to be completely false. So, for example, on January 12th, which wasn't that long ago, Karine Jean-Pierre, the Oracle, the spokeslady at the White House, assured us that all classified documents in Joe Biden's possession had already been found.
You said that the search has been completed, but is the president confident that there are no additional documents with classified markings that remain in any other additional locations?
Look, I can just refer you to what his team said. The search is complete. He is confident in this process, and I will leave it there.
He's confident in the process. What? She didn't say there were more documents. They're hiding everything. They're lying about everything. In fact, more documents were just found in Joe Biden's home. Clearly an effort to undermine Joe Biden by his own party and make sure that he doesn't run again. but also an example of breaking the law, because having classified documents in your home is, as we have learned following the Mar-a-Lago raid in August, a felony and a threat to this nation's security. But CNN isn't that concerned. On CNN this weekend, its crack investigators assured us they've already looked into this and everything's fine.
You know, for many Republicans, the argument seems to be that President Biden is both not mentally fit to hold office, and yet he's supposed to be this, you know, in the minds of some Republicans, this criminal mastermind who is holding on to these documents for some nefarious reason. Does that make any sense?
So notice the framing here. CNN is not concerned about what the President of the United States has done or not done, whether he's broken the law or not, what the contents of these classified documents might be. What are these classified documents, by the way? Why don't we know? Can you generally categorize them for us? Are they nuclear secrets? Do they pertain to China, Ukraine? What is this? CNN doesn't want to know. What they want to talk about is criticism from Republicans. It's about Republicans. They're saying Joe Biden's a mastermind and he's senile. Actually, no one's saying that. At best, Joe Biden is living the life he's lived for quite some time, which is as the source of cash for his ne'er-do-well son and his ne'er-do-well brother, who have made a fortune from hostile foreign governments. And again, we're not guessing at that. Hunter Biden already admitted it on TV.
You didn't have any extensive knowledge about natural gas or Ukraine itself, though.
No, but I think that I had as much knowledge as anybody else that was on the board, if not more.
In the list that you gave me of the reasons why you're on that board, you did not list the fact that you were the son of the vice president.
Yeah, no.
What role do you think that played?
I think that it is impossible